One signature, one small country. And Vladimir Putin just suffered his most humiliating defeat in Europe, without a single bullet being fired. Stay with me, because what Moldova just pulled off is the kind of move that gets studied in political science classrooms for the next 50 years. If you follow geopolitics and you haven't heard about what happened on April 8, 2026, you're about to understand why every foreign ministry in the post-Soviet world went quiet when the news broke. Drop a comment right now. Did you even know Moldova existed before today? Because most people didn't. And that's exactly what makes this story so extraordinary. Picture a map of Europe. Find the strip of land wedged between Romania and Ukraine. Smaller than most American states. Population under 3 million. GDP smaller than a mid-sized American city. Moldova. For 30 years, Russia used this country as a pressure point, a lever, a live demonstration that even the smallest European nations could be held hostage to Kremlin's strategy indefinitely. And for 30 years, it worked. 1,500 Russian soldiers sat in a narrow sliver of land on Moldova's eastern edge called Transnistria. Not invited. Not authorized under any current international agreement. Simply there because Russia put them there in 1992 and dared the world to make it leave. The world blinked. For 3 decades, nobody moved them. Then, on April 8, 2026, Moldovan President Maia Sandu picked up a pen. One signature, one document. And in the time it takes to write her name, she did something that Russian military power, Russian energy blackmail, Russian hybrid warfare, and 30 years of Kremlin pressure campaigns had spent 3 decades trying to prevent. She cut the last institutional thread connecting Moldova to Russia's sphere of influence. Moldova officially withdrew from the Commonwealth of Independent States, the post-Soviet political framework that has been Moscow's primary tool for maintaining grip over former Soviet republics for a generation. And here is where the story gets genuinely stunning. So make sure you're watching closely because the next detail is the one that changes everything. With that withdrawal, 1,500 Russian soldiers who went to sleep believing they were a strategic asset, Moscow's iron fist in Eastern Europe, woke up the next morning as something else entirely: illegal occupiers. Trapped. No way in, no way out. And beneath their feet, literally in the ground under the region where they are stationed, sits 20,000 tons of Soviet-era ammunition. An arsenal stockpiled for a war that never happened, the Warsaw Pact invasion of Western Europe. 57% of it has already exceeded its stated shelf life. Military engineers don't use the word dangerous to describe Kobazna. They use the word catastrophic. We'll get to exactly what that means in a moment. But first, if this story is already hitting different, share it right now, because your contacts deserve to understand what's actually happening on Europe's eastern frontier. Let's talk about the mechanism, because Moldova's CIS withdrawal is not symbolic. The Commonwealth of Independent States is the institutional architecture Russia built after the Soviet collapse to maintain legal and political connections with former republics. Trade frameworks, security agreements, diplomatic protocols, and critically, the thin but real legal cover that allowed Russian military personnel operating in member states to argue their presence had some basis in international frameworks. That cover was always contested in Moldova's case. The Russian military presence in Transnistria was never fully legitimate under international law. But CIS membership created ambiguity, the specific gray zone Russia prefers. Not legal, not clearly illegal, just complicated enough that the international community couldn't coordinate a clean response. Moldova's withdrawal eliminated that ambiguity in a single afternoon. The Russian operational group in Transnistria, the official name for the 1,500 soldiers stationed there, went from a contested but institutionally covered presence to an illegal occupying force on Moldovan territory in the time it takes a president to sign her name. Moldova did not stop there. Chisinau took a second step that was, if anything, more operationally devastating than the CIS withdrawal itself. Moldova declared the entire command echelon of the Russian operational group, every senior Russian military officer stationed in Transnistria, persona non grata on Moldovan territory, expelled permanently. Any Russian commander who steps into Moldovan-controlled territory faces immediate deportation. The command structure that would receive orders from Moscow and execute them on the ground in Transnistria has been legally severed from the troops it is supposed to command. Moscow can still issue orders. Those orders now have no functioning chain of command to travel through that does not cross territory Moldova has closed to Russian military personnel. Think about what that means operationally. You have 1,500 soldiers in the field. Their commanders cannot legally reach them. And here is the loop that should keep you watching. We are going to show you exactly what happens when a military unit loses its command structure, its supply lines, and its legal basis for existence simultaneously. Because it is already happening. And the situation on the ground is more extraordinary than anything Russian state media will ever broadcast. Here's what those 1,500 soldiers woke up to after April 8th. Transnistria is a strip of land 4,000 square kilometers in size, roughly 40 kilometers wide at its widest point. On one side, Moldova, which has just declared their presence illegal and their commanders expelled. On the other side, Ukraine, actively at war with Russia, border closed to Russian military movement. Above them, Moldovan and Ukrainian airspace, both closed to Russian military aircraft. The land corridors and air bridges connecting Transnistria to Russia do not exist. They effectively stopped existing when the Ukraine war began in 2022. But before April 8th, there was at least the theoretical institutional cover of CIS membership, allowing Moscow to claim the connection was maintained and the presence was legitimate. That cover is gone now. 1,500 soldiers. A strip of land 40 kilometers wide. No resupply route. No reinforcement route. No extraction route. Not a single bullet can reach them. Not a liter of fuel. Not a single replacement personnel. And here is the detail that makes the situation darkly absurd. The vast majority of these soldiers are not actually Russian. They are local Transnistrian residents who hold Russian passports because Moscow has spent years distributing Russian citizenship in the region as a geopolitical tool, creating Russian citizens in territories it wanted leverage over. Many of these men have never been to Russia. They are local people with Russian passports who are now notionally soldiers in a military unit that Russia cannot supply, cannot reinforce, cannot command, and apparently cannot bring home. Russia's Security Council Secretary Sergei Shoigu went on record threatening military intervention to protect Russian citizens. Military intervention that Russia has zero logistical capacity to execute. Every route is closed. Every corridor runs through either Moldova or Ukraine. Both are now actively hostile to Russian military movement. Kirilo Budanov, head of Ukrainian military intelligence, was direct. Reinforcing the contingent in Transnistria is physically impossible. Not difficult, physically impossible. Now let's talk about what is underneath those 1,500 soldiers. Because the human story of trapped troops is significant. But the military and environmental story of what sits in the ground beneath them is something else entirely. The Kobazna Ammunition Depot. This facility has been in Transnistria since the Soviet collapse. Left behind by the massive Soviet 14th Army when it withdrew from Eastern Europe at the end of the Cold War. It was stockpiled for one specific purpose: the Warsaw Pact armored thrust into Western Europe that NATO's entire existence was designed to deter. When the Cold War ended, the invasion didn't happen. The ammunition stayed. 20,000 tons of it, hundreds of thousands of artillery shells, massive quantities of tank rounds, millions of small arms cartridges, rockets, mortars, anti-tank weapons. For scale, the largest non-nuclear explosion in recorded history, the 1917 Halifax explosion, involved approximately 2,700 tons of explosive material. Kobazna contains roughly 7 times that mass in military munitions, and 57% of those munitions have exceeded their stated shelf life. Not slightly. These are Cold War-era Soviet munitions from the 1960s and 1970s. Expired military ammunition does not become inert. It becomes unpredictable. Degraded propellants, compromised detonators, chemical changes in explosive compounds that make munitions more sensitive to heat, vibration, and shock than when they were manufactured. Military engineers who have assessed Kobazna describe a potential mass detonation as equivalent in force to a small tactical nuclear weapon. An area spanning tens of kilometers in every direction would be flattened. Environmental contamination lasting decades. And this depot has been sitting there, degrading, for 30 years, while Russian soldiers prevented international inspectors from coming anywhere near it. Moldova's CIS withdrawal changes that. Russia's legal cover for keeping inspectors out, the presence of Russian military personnel as guards, is gone. The international community can now demand access. Moldova has every incentive to make that demand loudly and immediately. Let's trace how Moldova got here, because this did not happen by accident. It happened because President Sandu's government spent 3 years systematically dismantling every lever Russia used to maintain control, one by one, in sequence, with strategic patience that the Kremlin never anticipated from a country this small. Energy first. Moldova was dependent on Russian natural gas flowing through Ukraine to heat homes and power industry. Russia used that dependency as a blackmail weapon repeatedly, threatening to cut supply, actually cutting supply, weaponizing winter. The Sandu government responded by doing what Russia calculated would be too expensive and too difficult to accomplish. It physically connected Moldova to Europe's energy grid, new transmission infrastructure to Romania, EU financial support covering the cost, the explicit strategic goal of making Russian energy blackmail permanently irrelevant. Russia cut the gas. Moldova did not freeze. It turned on the European connection, blackmail weapon neutralized. Then the institutional layer, the CIS frameworks, the bilateral agreements giving Russian interests legal footholds in Moldovan governance, systematically withdrawn from or renegotiated. The April 8th CIS withdrawal was the culmination, the last major thread cut. Then the political layer. Russia has been running influence operations inside Moldova for years, funding opposition parties, backing pro-Russian politicians, running disinformation campaigns targeting EU integration. Those campaigns failed, repeatedly, in elections where Russia's preferred candidates and narratives lost. Moldova built a domestic political consensus for European integration that 3 decades of Russian pressure could not fracture. Every lever neutralized, every tool broken. April 8th was the last one. Here is the piece that makes this not just about Moldova's past with Russia, but about Moldova's future with Europe. Moldova is currently the fastest progressing EU accession candidate on the continent. Not one of the fastest, the fastest. EU accession is notoriously slow. Countries spend decades in negotiation and reform. The Western Balkans have been in various stages of EU candidacy for 20 years without acceding. Moldova is moving faster than anyone projected, and it is moving faster precisely because of what Russia did to it. The urgency forged by external threat. The political clarity created by knowing exactly what the alternative looks like. The EU is responding. Billions of euros in resilience funding, military modernization support, cybersecurity investment, economic integration programs. Brussels has stopped treating Moldova as a buffer state and started treating it as what it increasingly is, a strategic anchor on the EU's eastern frontier. And Chisinau has developed a specific innovation for handling the Transnistria problem that eliminates Russia's classic veto. Moldova is pursuing EU accession with the territory under central government control, right bank first. Transnistria will integrate later or be addressed separately. Russia's frozen conflict was supposed to be an indefinite block on Moldova's European path. Moldova just went around it. Inside Transnistria itself, the picture is collapse in slow motion. The free Russian natural gas that was the region's economic lifeblood has been cut. Ukraine halted Russian gas transit at the start of 2025. The Kuchergin power plant, Transnistria's primary economic asset, is now running on imported coal at market prices, rather than the subsidized Russian gas it was built to use. The economics no longer function. The Transnistrian economy depended on 3 things: free Russian gas, electricity sales to Moldova, and Russian financial support. All 3 are disappearing. The population is responding the way populations always respond to economic collapse: leaving. Young people, educated people, people with options, going to Europe through Moldova, through Romania, into the EU labor market that Moldova's integration is opening to them. What remains is an aging population, a bankrupt administration in Tiraspol still issuing statements expecting Russian rescue that is not coming, and 1,500 soldiers who are becoming less of a strategic asset and more of an expensive liability with every day that passes. The separatist project is failing from the inside, not through military force, but through economics and demographics, and the simple human preference for a future over a past. Moldova did not need to conquer Transnistria. It needed to outlast it. It is winning. Here is what keeps Russian foreign policy planners awake at night. And it is not the 1,500 soldiers or the Kobazna depot, or even the CIS withdrawal. It is the unification question. Moldovans and Romanians share a language, a history, a cultural identity that 7 decades of Soviet and post-Soviet separation has not erased. Romania is a NATO member. President Maia Sandu has stated explicitly, not as a campaign promise, as a clearly articulated personal position, that she would vote yes to unification with Romania in a referendum. When the Moldovan president says that in Washington, in Brussels, in Bucharest, it lands in the Kremlin as a specific kind of threat. Because unification does not just change Moldova's status, it changes NATO's geography. If Moldova unites with Romania, if even parts of Moldovan territory become part of Romania, those parts fall under NATO collective defense instantly. The 1,500 Russian soldiers in Transnistria would find themselves not facing Moldova's small national army, but the collective military apparatus of NATO's southeastern flank. F-16s overhead, Patriot systems watching every Russian military movement. The full NATO intelligence picture covering every square meter of the region. Russia's Foreign Minister Lavrov described this as a destructive plan that will destroy the Moldovan state. That language, that European integration destroys Moldova, is the specific framing of a man who has run out of strategic arguments and reached for hyperbole. Lavrov is not making a case. He is expressing alarm. Russia has lost more than territory in Moldova. It has lost a tool, a 30-year-old tool, carefully maintained, repeatedly deployed, central to Moscow's strategy for keeping Eastern Europe unstable and under Kremlin pressure. Transnistria was the laboratory where Russia tested the tactics it later deployed across the post-Soviet space. Hybrid warfare before it had a name. Frozen conflicts as vetoes on European integration. Russian passport distribution to manufacture pretextual citizens whose protection could justify military presence. Separatist enclaves as pressure instruments against neighboring governments. All of it tested and refined in Transnistria from 1992 onward. The same playbook was applied in Georgia, in Ukraine, in various forms across the region. Moldova just demonstrated the playbook can be beaten, not by military force, but by patient, systematic, strategically sophisticated political and economic action. Integrate the energy grid, isolate the enclave economically, build the domestic political consensus that Russian pressure campaigns cannot fracture, accelerate EU accession, strip the legal cover for Russian military presence layer by layer, then sign the document that removes the last layer. The defeat in Moldova is not only a defeat in Moldova, it is a visible public demonstration that Russia's frozen conflict architecture can be dismantled. Every post-Soviet state is watching and drawing a specific conclusion. Russia's most powerful influence tools can be defeated. They require patience. They require European partnership. They require political will capable of withstanding sustained pressure. But they can be defeated. Moldova is the proof of concept. And let's come back to the 1,500 soldiers, because their situation illustrates something important about how Russia's imperial project actually functions when you strip away the rhetoric. Most of these men are local. Most have never been to Russia. Most hold Russian passports that were handed to them as instruments of a geopolitical project they didn't design and were never asked about. They are now abandoned. Moscow cannot extract them, cannot supply them, cannot command them through a functioning chain of command after Sandu's persona non grata declarations severed the officer echelon from the troops. Russia, which has spent 3 years telling its population that its military is invincible, that it protects Russian citizens wherever they are in the world, is abandoning 1,500 men in a strip of land in Eastern Europe, publicly, visibly, with no mechanism to do anything else. And the message that abandonment sends to every other place where Russia has distributed passports, manufactured dependency, and promised protection is devastating. Russia's citizenship guarantee is worth exactly as much as Russia's capacity to honor it. In Transnistria, surrounded by Moldova and Ukraine, that capacity is zero. These soldiers are not a strategic asset anymore. They are evidence. Evidence of what happens when Russia's imperial project exhausts its resources, its logistics, and its leverage. It does not send help. It sends statements, and it leaves its people behind. One small country, one signature, and the template Russia built over 30 years to control its neighbors just cracked open for everyone to see. If this analysis changed how you understand what's happening in Eastern Europe right now, share it with someone who needs to see it. And follow us for daily updates on the geopolitical shifts that mainstream coverage keeps missing. We break it down every day, clearly and without the noise. And if this kind of deep, honest geopolitical analysis is what you've been looking for, subscribing takes 2 seconds, and it means you never miss the story that actually matters.